Hello, everyone, and welcome to APS Webinars. This is the second broadcast in our newly launched series, Working in the U.S. Career Development for International Physicists. The title of today's webinar is Work Authorizations in the United States. I'm Midhat Farouk, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. APS membership gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources, like this webinar, allows you to get your research out to the community and network with potential employers or colleagues at our meetings, and have a greater positive impact about issues that are important to you through grassroots advocacy. It can also help connect you to a community of like-minded folks through participation in our forums, divisions, and topical groups. If you are not yet an APS member but value the things that we provide, we encourage you to consider joining today. I also wanted to share the ways in which APS engages with, serves, and supports the global physics community. With over 23% of our current members living outside of the US, APS provides opportunities to physicists around the world by offering a free one-year student membership, as well as other programs and resources that you can explore through the link provided. To support international physicists, APS Government Affairs consistently advocates for policies that promote scientific mobility. Scientists from around the globe attend APS meetings, and more than 2/3 of the published articles in APS journals are by authors outside of the US. This year, APS is launching a new open access journal, PRX Energy, which will showcase highly selective publications. Submissions open this summer, and if you'd like to keep up to date on PRX Energy, sign up for alerts through the link provided. Now for some quick housekeeping before we begin the webinar. The first portion of our broadcast will be presentations by the speakers and panelists, and then we will have a period of Q&A at the end. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A panel, which you can access by clicking the button on the lower right-hand side of your Zoom webinar window. You can submit questions at any time, and we will do our best to address all of them during the broadcast. You can adjust audio settings by using the button at the bottom left of your window, and can also turn live captioning on or off by clicking the arrow next to live transcript in the Zoom menu. A link to the recording of today's presentation will be made available on the APS webinar homepage within 5 business days of today's broadcast. Also, as you leave the webinar today, we do encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. And lastly, before we dive in, I wanted to mention that the next broadcast we have coming up in this series will be on navigating cultural differences, and it will take place in September. This will be followed by 3 more webinars for the remainder of 2021. We have some really exciting topics planned, so if you haven't already done so, please sign up for our webinars email list using the link shown. You can also find information about these broadcasts on our main webinars homepage. And so with that, let's get started. Our first speaker today is Dan Berger, who is a partner at the immigration law firm of Curran, Berger and Flute in Northampton, Massachusetts. He's a founding member of the U.S. Alliance of International Entrepreneurs, an honorary fellow of the American Academy of Adoption Attorneys, on the legal advisory board of the President's Alliance on Immigration and Higher Education, and a member of the USCIS Case Assistance Committee for the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Next, we have Maria Zeller-Maxim, the Assistant Director, SEVIS Compliance at the University of Colorado Boulder. Maria has been an international student and scholar advisor for the University of Colorado Boulder since 2004. She has a JD from the University of Oregon and BA in Japanese and International Affairs from the University of Colorado. While Maria enjoys helping international scholar and community at CU Boulder with various immigration-related issues, she finds helping students navigate the transition to optional practical training, or OPT, particularly rewarding. Additionally, we have joining us today Dr. Xiao Thomas Zhang, who moved to the United States from China for his undergraduate studies at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He then continued his PhD studies in physics at the University of Michigan and defended his thesis in 2017. His area of studies was computational methods and mathematical modeling of complex networks and their applications in epidemics, social, and biological networks. Upon graduation, he moved to Silicon Valley and worked as a data scientist in the tech industry. Currently, he is an applied scientist working for Amazon, where he leverages his skills in mathematical modeling and machine learning to solve real-world problems, business problems. And lastly, we have with us my wonderful colleague, Farah Dawood, the chapter's program manager at APS. She earned her PhD in materials chemistry from the Pennsylvania State University in 2010, and following that completed 2 postdoctoral positions at the University of Maryland and Los Alamos National Laboratory. Farah joined the faculty at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York as an assistant professor of chemistry in 2015. During her time at Hamilton, she was awarded the John R. Hatch Excellence in Teaching Award in 2017 and was the recipient of the Class of 1966 Career Development Award in 2016 and 2017. At APS, she launched APS Chapters in 2020, a pilot program to engage graduate students, postdocs, and early career scientists. Farah can be reached at the email provided if you're interested in learning more about Chapters or anything else she talks about today. And with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to our first speaker. So Dan, please go ahead and share and take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I guess I just want to say very quickly, I've been spending the last week or so working with folks from Afghanistan. If any of you are from that country or have close friends or students who are from there, our best wishes to you. That it's a tough situation. So moving forward, I'm going to turn on. I'm going to share my screen and hold on just a second because I want to just bring that up here. So I'm going to go through some general thoughts about immigration and then some specific categories. I'm not going to go into any of the categories in any great detail. There is more information on our website. There are more information. You can get more information from your international advisor, but I do want you to know about the range of categories because there are a lot of different categories and sometimes people only know about the ones they've seen. It's impossible to talk about immigration without talking about politics and talking about the pandemic. And over the last few years, we've seen a lot more anxiousness and concern about immigration processing. I do want you to know that in the American immigration system, laws and visa categories can only be changed by Congress. And whatever your political persuasion is, Congress is having trouble agreeing on almost anything these days. So we are not expecting big changes. We're hoping for an entrepreneur visa. We're hoping for some smaller changes. But I think we can be pretty comfortable understanding that through Democrat and Republican administrations, the categories of temporary visas and green cards will stay the same. But what does change is the tone and the speed. Things slow down, things speed up. Officers approve cases more easily. Officers look much more carefully at cases. And that's really what we see change from one administration to another. When it says there are lots of rumors, there are. I'm sure a lot of you are learning about immigration from Facebook and from listservs and from friends and from news sources. Please ask. There are a lot of rumors out there. There are a lot of ideas about what might change. There are ideas about what might work. So ask somebody who knows. Ask an immigration attorney. Ask your international advisor before you. Just to be sure that information is correct. All right. And I'm going to go to the next slide. And, just trying to, there we go. I'm sorry, it was just a little slow. Okay. So as an overview, and the word permanent should be over on the right. The U.S. immigration system is divided into temporary visas, and some of them require temporary intent, like your F1 or J1 visa, and each one has its own restrictions. And then there are permanent categories, also called green cards, which allow someone to work anywhere and to be on a path toward U.S. citizenship. These categories, the basic strategy is to try to keep in a temporary category until you decide if you do want to move on to permanent residence, and then look for green card options. One of the most common questions that we get from students is, how do I talk to employers about this? A lot of students are very nervous that if they bring up immigration at the beginning, they may not get the job. And I have a few thoughts about that. And I think it's very important to keep in touch with your career office and with the mentors through APS to get advice. But basically, big companies have a visa policy. So you don't, in my opinion, you don't need to be nervous about telling them about your status, because they know what to do. If you're getting a job at Amazon or Google, they have an immigration team, and they will tell you if they will sponsor a visa or not for a particular position. Smaller companies, smaller colleges maybe, may not have a policy, and in fact may never have done this before. And that's where you may need to be involved more in trying to explain the situation. I do encourage you to share upfront what your immigration status is. If you share that you may need visa sponsorship later and the employer does not want you, honestly, it's better to know that earlier than later. I see students sometimes in difficult situations where they're working, their OPT is running out, and then the employer is not ready to sponsor them. And let us know. I'd be more than happy to to help you talk to an employer who doesn't know what to do, and reassure them that this isn't as complicated as they may think. All right. Common path, most common path here is going to be the F1 student visa. I imagine most of you are on the F1 student visa. You'll get practical training. You'll get the, then often the company will sponsor for an H1B visa, and then later for a green card. I put this up here because a lot of people think this is a rule. It's not a rule. This is the way it usually works out. And there is no requirement. Some of my clients are never on an H1B. They're just sponsored for a green card before OPT, or they end up on a different kind of visa. So I think so it's important to be creative, to brainstorm with the employer if they will let you, and to think about the best path for you. And now, let's see, Maria, can we bring you in here too?
Yes. Thanks, Dan. And I'll just prompt you when I'm ready for you to move on to the next slide.
Okay, so, sounds good.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria, and I am a designated school official. That's the official title that Department of Homeland Security uses for your international student advisors who have access to CVIS. So I'm a DSO, and I've been working with students and OPT for a long time now. So I've seen a lot of changes in the OPT process and the OPT rules and guidance. I personally absolutely love OPT. It's a great tool for international students who hold F1 status. It's also a great tool for your employers. And for me, it's very rewarding to see, because I actually have the opportunity to follow my international students as they leave the University of Colorado and take the world by storm. So it's a lot of fun. But there are three types of OPT I'm just going to briefly talk about, and Dan, feel free to jump in at any time. I'm briefly going to talk about post-completion OPT, the 24-month OPT STEM extension, and the cap gap. So next slide, please.
Okay. Sorry,
So it just takes a little while. That's fine.
Just a little delay. Yeah.
Okay. So for the next slide is just briefly talking about post-completion OPT. And for post-completion OPT, like with any kind of OPT, you really must work with your school, the school where you're currently enrolled and who has access to your CVIS record, because the school is part of the OPT process through the very end. So I'm going to emphasize here how important it is to establish a connection to your DSO. They're going to need to walk you and help you through this process. You can't do it without them because you're going to need the I-20 recommendation from them to move forward. For post-completion OPT, timing is really important. A lot of students hold off on applying for OPT because they want that perfect job offer, but you need to remember that you don't need an offer letter to apply for optional practical training. For post-completion OPT, what they're going to be looking at is that you've been maintaining your status and that you are in a period of post-completion, meaning you've completed your degree requirement. So they just want to see that I-20 from your DSO. And I am recommending that students apply as early as they possibly can. There is a limited exception right now. It expires in October, but if you're graduating this semester, they expanded the application period. You can apply 120 days in advance right now as opposed to 90, but that's something you need to work with your DSO. It's very temporary. It's not going to last for very long. I do recommend that you apply as soon as possible. If you are graduating in December or graduating in May, you'd want to apply in February, because right now it is taking USCIS more than 90 days in some cases to process the OPT application. And when I first started this position, Dan, I don't know but when I first started, USCIS was somewhat obligated to adjudicate an OPT application within 90 days, but that's no longer the case. So for post-completion OPT, if you really need that employment authorization document, you're going to want to apply sooner than later. And the nice thing about post-completion OPT is that it belongs to you. You can actually be self-employed while on a post-completion OPT. You can have volunteer employment. Dan might want to touch on this. I personally find volunteering on OPT to be kind of a scary kettle of fish. It has issues because there are labor laws that come into this. And we have a lot of information on our website for international students who want to use volunteer employment. The thing about OPT, when I first started doing this job back in 2004, students would apply for OPT and then they would just disappear. We had no idea what they were doing. We didn't know if they were working. The government didn't track it. But now OPT is tracked, it's reported, and you're only allowed 90 days of unemployment for the first 12 months of OPT. So some students will try to find volunteer opportunities to stop that accrual of the 90 days of unemployment. That in and of itself can be problematic. It's something that you would want to talk to your DSO about. And with post-completion OPT, there are reporting requirements. So you just need to remember you're still an F1 status and you're required to report your OPT to the Student Exchange Visitor Program. They have a nifty tool now called the SEVP portal, which works most of the time, some of the time. If you have trouble with your SEVP portal, you can contact your DSO. But you can go in there with post-completion OPT and you can update your employment. The DSOs are supposed to be confirming the relevance to make sure that the work you're doing while on OPT is related to your major field of study. After your, and next slide, please. After your first 12 months of post-completion OPT, you have the opportunity to apply for the 24-month OPT STEM extension if you work in a STEM field. And if you are in physics, you would definitely be eligible for this OPT STEM extension if you are working for an employer who's registered with E-Verify. That was something they just tagged in when they built the 24-month OPT STEM extension. They said, I think to the world, they said, if you're an employer and you want a student to continue working with you, then you have to register for E-Verify. I think it was a way of them getting to have more employers to opt into the E-Verify system. So you're going to want to make sure that your employer is registered with E-Verify. That is something on the OPT STEM extension application, the form I-765, that USCIS actually looks very closely at. The most requests for evidence that I see for an OPT STEM extension, it's when the E-Verify number isn't quite accurate. What I see a lot is students use the EIN instead of the E-Verify number. There's confusion there. So you want to make sure that your I-765 is accurate. Again, you're going to have to work with your designated school official. You can apply in advance. You can apply up to 90 days prior to your OPT STEM extension end date. The 120-day exception doesn't apply to STEM. But the great thing about STEM is that you can actually keep working after your 12 months of OPT expires. You can continue working for 180 days as long as you've filed for the OPT STEM extension prior to the end date. So for the first 12 months of OPT, as many of you probably know, you actually are supposed to have your EAD in hand before you start working, but they have this nifty 180-day extension that applies to the 24-month extension. So apply early. There's no reason to wait. Go ahead and apply early. But if it's not approved by the time that your post-completion OPT ends, you do get that 180-day extension. There are some significant additional OPT reporting requirements. And the main one is there's that Form I-983 training plan. A DSO cannot recommend you for the OPT STEM extension until they have reviewed that training plan. And they have to confirm with SEVP before they issue the I-20 that the I-983 is complete and meets all requirements. So when you sit down and look at that I-983 and you work with your supervisor or your employer, just make sure that you spend some time on the plan, on the goals and objectives, and really make a connection between the training plan and your degree. As a DSO, I will look at that and I'm like, wow, it looks like a great job. Really interesting. Often I have no idea what they're talking about because it's so science related, but I'm not seeing the connection. So don't make the assumption that the US government understands what you're doing and how it's connected to your degree. So spend some time on that Form I-983 training plan. There are 6-month reporting requirements. You have to validate that your information is correct every 6 months. And there's a 12-month evaluation and a final evaluation. And this is where it gets tricky for a DSO. In the first 12 months of OPT, there isn't a termination requirement. So as you know, a designated school official has the ability to go in and take away your immigration status if you hold F1 status. And for OPT, when we have to terminate, we have a lot more leeway than with the 24-month extension. But failure to submit the 6-month extension or the evaluation is a reason to terminate the F1 CVIS record. So you want to make sure that you're working very closely with your DSO and that you're maintaining your F1 status throughout your OPT 12 and 24-month period, but particularly in the 24-month period, they can automatically, SEVP has said that they turned on the function to automatically terminate the F1 CVIS record for failure to report. I've only seen one termination, but apparently they're going to start doing that more often. So you need to make sure that you're reporting in a timely manner. And the other thing about the 24-month extension is that the employment options are a little bit more limited. You have to have paid employment. You can't volunteer. You cannot be self-employed. And working for a third party like an agency can be problematic. So there are some limitations to the 24-month OPT STEM extension. Dan, next slide. And then the other one, and Dan might have something to say about this as well, is the cap gap. I love cap gap. It's a great thing because the academic world doesn't match with the, and he'll talk about cap, I think, in a little bit, but the H1Bs out there, and I call it the real world, and I probably shouldn't say that, but out in industry and non-higher ed, the H1Bs tend to have a start date of October 1st for reasons that I won't go into. And most students graduate in May. So if you have OPT STEM extension, often your OPT is going to end in May, and then you have your H1B starting in October. And what do? Well, thankfully, there's this thing called cap gap. And again, you go to your designated school official, and you can request an I-20 that reflects the extension of both your OPT and your status through September 30th. So you're still maintaining your F1 status, you're still reporting, you're still following the F1 rules up until your H1B start date, and then you wake up in the morning on October 1st and you're an H1B. but until that date, you're still F1 status. You cannot get cap gap unless the employer who filed the H1B is not cap exempt. That's the wrong. Is a cap subject employer. So you have to be working for a cap subject employer. The application that was sent, the petition, has to be for a change of status, and it has to request an October 1st start date. Different schools request different things for the OPT cap gap. At CU Boulder, we want to see proof that it was filed. Often your CVIS record is automatically updated to reflect the filing of the H1B. We can see it in there, but we like to see that receipt as well. So we'll ask students to upload a copy of the receipt notice, and then we will issue the I-20 for cap gap. Next slide. So just a few things to keep in mind about OPT. I know this is really fast, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Please work closely with your DSO. I think that a lot of students, when they graduate, they disconnect. But it's still very important to remember, if you're on OPT, you're still an F1 student, and you need to work with the school that has responsibility for your CVIS record. I recommend that you keep very accurate records of all OPT related employment. In the future, when you apply for a benefit from USCIS, such as an H1B or even permanent residency or some other status down the way, USCIS has the right, and they will often look back over your immigration record, and they can ask you for proof of documentation that you maintained your status. I recently had an international student F1 status email me, and he said, "Hey, Maria, remember that I-983 I gave you like 2.5 years ago? I don't have that, and USCIS is asking me for that." So luckily, we still had that on file. We're required to keep them on file for a certain period of time after the OPT ends. So we still had the I-983, but I recommend that you also keep very careful track of your OPT employment records. They can be asked for from USCIS down the line. Also, I recommend you report in a timely manner. Dan might have something to say about this, but when I file an H1B and I ask my F1 scholar for proof that they have been reporting their OPT, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I totally forgot to do that," and they go into the portal, and the portal's closed to them, and they go to their DSO, and the DSO updates the OPT, but there's a record that you didn't report on time, and technically that's an infraction of the F1 CVIS regulations. So keep in mind that all OPT employment is supposed to all changes are supposed to be reported within 10 days. So I just recommend that you keep that in mind throughout your OPT period. As we know, the CVIS system is an imperfect system. Those of you who have access to the portal will know that. We have issues with consular processing. So there's an interface that connects USCIS with your CVIS record. It's called Claims, and Claims is not a perfect system. It doesn't recognize the difference in an H1B petition. So if you file an H1B petition for consular notification, as opposed to a change of status, CVIS doesn't know that. And so what CVIS is going to do on October 1st, it's going to close out your F1 CVIS record no matter what. So you're going to wake up on October 1st, and your F1 CVIS record will be in completed status. And I've had students who in December, January, February, they're like, "Yeah, I need a travel signature." And I'm saying, "Well, your F1 CVIS record was closed for change of status approved." And then there's this big worry because the H1B was actually filed for consular notification, which is when you would leave the United States to get an H1B visa or gain H1B status through reentry, not through a change of status. So a lot of people don't know that your CVIS record will automatically complete. So just think about the nature of the H1B petition and work with your DSO, because this is one thing we can fix. There are a lot of things we cannot fix, but we can easily request a data fix to have your F1 CVIS record set back to active, because they understand that it's an imperfect system. Again, you're still an international student with an F1 student status throughout your OPT. So make sure you maintain that status, because if you don't, it can have a negative implication for you in the future. So that's all I have right now for OPT, and I hand it back over to Dan. Oh, Dan, actually, I wanted to ask you a question, and I wanted to maybe have you bring it up later. I often have conversations with my students about maybe you should really take advantage of the 36 months of OPT before you jump forward into the H1B, because the H1B is, has a time limit, and there's something positive to using the full 36 months of the OPT STEM extension. But a lot of my students are really excited about moving into the H1B status. So maybe that's something you can talk about the pluses and negatives of that at some point. And now I'm done.
Sure. Okay, no, thank you, Maria. And I think I'm going to leave this slide up for just a minute because that worked closely with your DSO. I can't tell you how important that is. When you're at a college or university, you have people like Maria who are trained to help you, and their only goal is to help you. It's a little different when you get into industry. If you're, the immigration team at a larger company is working for the company and for you, but it's different. So take advantage of that and work with them, listen to them when they send emails or reminders or whatever it is, and realize that sometimes students come to me and because I'm a private lawyer and they want me to give advice. I'm happy to give advice, but really you should be starting with your foreign student advisor, and don't assume that because I'm a practicing lawyer in a private firm, I know more than the DSO. As you can tell from Maria's last few slides, this is what she does. And she sees a lot more OPT applications and a lot more STEM OPT applications. And I don't have access to see this, so I don't have the same insights. So really make sure that you work with your DSO and take advantage of that. But thinking more about, Maria, about your question about the OPT versus H1B, I'm going to talk now about the H1B cap, which is the lottery, but it's a great question. I usually recommend trying to use all of your 36 months of OPT. It's great. H1B is limited to 6 years. So if you can push back using that, that's great. Some of the factors to consider are, can you find a job that qualifies for STEM OPT? If your dream job is not an E-Verify employer, then I think the H1B is a very good option. Or if you're in the process of working on a green card, the F1 is can be a less good status because the F1 requires temporary intent. The H1B is one of the few visas that allows you to travel when you're actively in the middle of a green card process. And as Maria said, if you coordinate it, you can file the H1B for consular processing, let it wait there for you, and use the rest of your OPT. So this is going to be a little bit of what we call a lightning round. I'm going to go through all the different visa categories. Again, I'm not going to do any of them perfectly, but I'm going to try to give you some general information. The most common issue with the H1B visa is the cap, which is a quota of how many H1Bs there are available each year. Let's just talk first about who does not have to worry about this. If you are working for a college or a university or many nonprofits, then you don't have to worry about the H1B cap. The rules about nonprofits are complicated, so talk to somebody, but if it's a nonprofit research organization, if it's a nonprofit that's directly affiliated with a college or university, there is no H1B quota. Also, the United States has treaties, free trade agreements with some countries that provide other kinds of visas that are kind of like the H1B but don't have the same quota. So if you are a citizen of Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, or Australia, or actually now New Zealand, then you may be able to use a free trade visa instead of an H1B and not worry about the H1B lottery. But otherwise, for everybody else who's working for a private company and is not a citizen of one of those countries, there are 85,000 visas available each year, and they're released on October 1st. 20,000 are kept for people with advanced degrees from US universities. If you think about the size of the US economy, that's just not a lot. And there were points back when I in the early 90s during the dot-com boom when the number of H1Bs was increased by Congress. I hope that'll happen again, but for now, there just are not enough visas. So quickly about the H1B, it is employer sponsored. You can't do it yourself. The employer has to sign it and file it and pay for it. If the employer asks you to pay for it, you can politely say that you heard on this webinar from the APS that the employee is not allowed to pay for it. It's good for 3 years at a time for up to a total of 6 years. It's based on a job that requires a specific degree. For most of you, that should be pretty straightforward. If you're a physicist with a physics degree, that's easy. If you kind of go on to do something a little more creative, let's say you have a physics degree, but you're working for APS, coordinating programs for physicists, that might be a harder H1B because it's harder to show that you need the physics degree to do that job. Again, this is where we come in, and I know Maria files these, I file these, and we think about the best argument to make. There must be a fair salary, but H1Bs can be part-time. So if your dream job is a part-time job, the H1B is possible. And the lottery, unfortunately, as I said, is only about a 35 to 40% success rate. It was even a little less this year. Okay, I'm not going to go into this too much because this is the American Physics Society, but just again, keep in mind that the job has to have a direct relationship to your degree. I was meeting with somebody else who's in physics who's gone into science policy, and that's a bit of a more complicated H1B. And Maria mentioned that I might be talking more about CAP-CAP. Well, here you go. This is the way it's going to work again for most of you. In the green there on the left, you're on the F1 now. I assume most of you are F1s. You apply for OPT, you get your 1 year of OPT, which is the purple. And then what you want to do is you want to, as soon as you have a job offer, you want to start talking to the company about filing for that H1B. The lottery is in March, so you want to try as many times as you can. If it's a 1/3 chance of success, then you all know that the more times you apply, the better your chance of getting it. So if you have a job offer in the March before you graduate, you might be able to try there. Otherwise, you'll try in the March during your OPT under the purple. And then later on, you may get 2 more chances if you do STEM OPT. Okay, now, as I mentioned, there are many other visa types. And each one's a little different. Some of them allow a husband or wife to work. Some of them are better for applying for a green card. Some of them are more flexible about what kind of work you can do. So I want to look quickly at the L, the E, and the O visa because those are some of the ones that might apply to some of you, especially as an alternative to the H1B. Okay, the L visa is a transfer visa. That means you work abroad for a year and then are transferred back to the US. It does allow a spouse to work. The Immigration Service will look carefully at it. It doesn't apply to every employee, but this can be a really great tool if a large or small company has an office abroad. And as you can imagine, the big companies, Microsoft and others, use this all the time. I haven't been able to figure out a better way to show this because every time I take this slide off, people are lighting up the chat saying, well, what countries are they? If you Google the words treaty, countries, and state, you will get this chart. The United States has treaties. The United States has agreements with all of these countries. And that means that if you are, thank you, in the chat, take a look in the chat to see that. If you are a citizen of one of these countries, then you may be able to apply for a special kind of visa called an E visa. E is an elephant. If you're working for a company that is owned by people from your country. Obviously, the details are complicated, but let's say, for example, excuse me, that you are from Sweden or Yugoslavia, or well, not Yugoslavia anymore, any of the former Yugoslav republics, or Honduras. If you're working for a company that's owned by people from your country, so let's say I'm from Honduras and I'm working for a Honduran company that's operating in the US, you might be able to do this. Another way to set up an e-visa is to create your own company. So if I'm from Honduras and I set up my own consulting business, I might be able to get a visa that way. Again, the details are a bit more complicated, but if I want you to know what questions to ask and what kinds of visas to look for. And then the O1 visa is really about marketing you. It's for anybody who is extraordinary in their field. We do a lot of these for, as you can see, for sports, business, dance, music, but it works in the sciences too. And it tends to be for people who have PhDs in physics. That would be, you would not rise to the level of extraordinary without a PhD, but we have done these for postdocs, and it can be an option again, or for people in industry, if you're not able to get the H1B for some reason. Now this is a green card, and I put this in here partly just to show, to remind me to say that the green card isn't for everybody. Just as Maria was saying that the H1B is not, don't rush to the H1B just because it's there, unless it's the right thing for you. Every year I have people who file a self-petition green card or get married and get a green card. And then a few years later, they decide they're not planning to live in the US long-term. Not everybody does. So what I would recommend, it is difficult to keep a green card if you are not living here. You can ask for permission to be outside the country temporarily, but the green card is for somebody who is living here as their long-term home. So if you're just not sure where life is taking you, stay on temporary visas, and then you can look for green card opportunities when you know you want to stay here. And once you get the green card, then you don't have to worry about coming to talks like this, and you can do anything. With a green card, you're eligible for full financial aid and student loans. You are on a path to US citizenship if you want to be, and you can work anywhere and travel anytime. Okay, labor certification is the most common type of green card. It requires testing the labor market, basically advertising. And this is something that you can literally do for any job. But it does involve the employer doing some work and paying for part of it. So the employer really has to be on board. But this is the most common type of green card. I did add this in. If you Google visa bulletin in state, you will see the monthly visa bulletin. Unfortunately, people born in China or India, as probably know this already, that you have a longer wait for green cards. It changes every month. Keep in mind that if you are married to somebody who is not born in China or India, then you're no longer subject to those backlogs. And this changes every month again. But for example, if somebody born in China in the first preference category, which is the highest level of employer-sponsored green card, right now there actually isn't a backlog, but there may be again later this year. The second preference is master's or PhD level, and those have a multi-year wait. And the third preference is a bachelor's level job, which also has a multi-year wait. So you want to plan your temporary visa strategy to work around these backlogs. Okay, again, I mentioned this was the lightning round, so here we go. I want to tell you about a couple other categories. There is an outstanding researcher professor category that can be sponsored by a company or a research organization or a university if you have a full-time research job. There is a multinational, managerial level transferee. It's kind of like the L1 visa where you work abroad for a year and get transferred back, but it's a direct path to a green card if your job is managerial level. This could be a very nice option for somebody, especially for somebody from China or India, to move into a higher, faster category. There is an investor green card, which is really tough. And there are companies that are marketing this all over the world. If your family is thinking of doing an investor green card, get a second opinion before you do. And then there are some simpler categories of the labor certification. One is for college level teaching. Can't be a temporary job, it could be an instructor, lecturer, professor. And there's also a green card for nurses and physical therapists. I know this is the American Physics Society, and many of you may not be heading for that, but it's a good reminder that if you are married to think, to see which person has the best option for a green card. You know, sometimes I have clients who are just getting a PhD from a top school in physics and they're going on to a great postdoc. And if you're married to a physical therapist, the physical therapist will be able to get a green card a lot faster than you. Marriage is another common category. The way the US immigration system is set up, it promotes family unity. So, you know, I know many of my clients will tell me, I don't want to get a green card through marriage. I don't want that kind of green card. Well, it's the same green card. So if you're getting married for all the right reasons, the marriage to a US citizen would be faster, easier, and cheaper, as long as you feel as if the marriage will continue. Other family categories are just really slow and probably not that helpful, including brother, sister of a US citizen, adult child of a US citizen, and so forth. And asylum is a category for people who are unfortunately afraid to go to their home country. If that's the case, please just feel free to reach out to me independently and we can discuss that. There's also a green card lottery. I would put that on your electronic calendar for October every year. Go to a .gov site, not a .com site. You shouldn't be paying money for this. But it's a diversity lottery. So what that means is, and these are the countries from last year, it might be a little different this year, but basically these countries in blue send most of the immigrants to the US. So if anybody who's born in one of these countries cannot apply for the lottery. That's a lot of you, I imagine, but on the other hand, this still leaves about 165 countries in the world that can apply, so think about it. Also, if you are, let's say you're born in Canada, so you can't apply, but if you're married to somebody who's born in Bolivia, you can both apply. And also keep in mind that some sort of mid-sized countries like Taiwan, Vietnam, Poland tend to go on and off the list each year, so don't assume that last year's list is the same as this year's list. Right, so I'm going to pause there and move on to the next speakers.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so we're going to quickly hear from Thomas and Farah before we take questions. We do have lots of great questions coming in and we'll get to them soon. So Farah, can I ask you to go next and briefly talk about your career path?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Midhat, thank you again for the invitation. So as Midhat mentioned, my name is Farah Dawood, and I am currently the chapter's program manager at APS, the American Physical Society. I'm a chemist by training, and what I'll do is I'll talk about my career path and highlight the various visas, et cetera, that I've held during all of it. So you can kind of understand, and maybe if you have questions related to what I did, feel free to ask. To start, I am a citizen, I still am, of Sri Lanka. It's an island in the Indian Ocean. I completed high school in Sri Lanka. I attended one semester of university in Sri Lanka and then decided to apply to college in the US. This was approximately 20 years ago. So I attended Concordia College. It's a small college in northern Minnesota on an F1 visa. And in my junior year, while I was at Concordia, I applied for and participated in an NSF-REU, that's the research experience for undergraduates in solid state chemistry, on a CPT, that's the curricular practical training, which was allowed by my F1 visa. After I graduated from college, I used my F1 OPT, this was the post-completion OPT, to work in the summer between graduating from college and starting grad school. So I think that was approximately 3 months or so. So I started graduate school. This was also on an F1 visa at Texas A&M University. And midway through, towards the middle of my second year of grad school, my advisor decided to move to Penn State. And so I moved with my advisor, with my research group, to Penn State. And my F1 visa got transferred, and the two international student offices at both universities handled everything. I worked with great DSOs, everything was smooth, it was a smooth transition. I completed my PhD in 2010 from Penn State, and I immediately started a postdoc position at the University of Maryland. So I was at UMD for 3 years, The first year of that was on my F1 OPT. And then my research advisor at UMD wanted to, apply for my H1B right away. So my second and third years, I was on an H1B visa. So after UMD, I decided to do another postdoc. And this time I moved to New Mexico for a postdoc at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Contrary to popular belief, you can work at a national lab if you are an international an international student or an international scholar. You just have to find out and ask questions about which jobs are open to you. So I worked at Los Alamos for about 2.5 years, and all of this was on an H1B visa that got transferred from the University of Maryland. As Mid had mentioned, in 2015, I joined Hamilton College in upstate New York into a full-time tenure track faculty position in chemistry. And that H1B got transferred again from Los Alamos to Hamilton. So as a quick recap, I held an H1B as a postdoc at the University of Maryland, as a postdoc at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and as a faculty member at Hamilton College. While I was at Hamilton, I applied for my green card, and I am still a green card holder, and now I work at the American Physical Society. It sounds crazy, it sounds like a lot. It's all of these different stages, and often folks ask me how do you manage to keep track of everything? If I had to give anyone any one piece of advice, it would be stay organized, work with your DSO. They are your best friend. They know what they're doing, so ask them questions. They will help you, and don't wait until the last minute to do anything. Make sure you know what you want, try to plan as best as you can as to what you want to do, and then work with your DSO or the relevant officer where you're at with what your plan is. So I'll let Thomas go next, and then I'll happy to answer questions afterwards.
Great, yeah. Thanks for sharing. I think I can definitely echo a lot of your experience. But so to everyone who's attending, my name is Thomas, Zhang Xiao in Chinese. So I guess a little bit about my background. I moved to the United States for college and then stayed here for grad school. So for all those years, I've been pretty much just on F1 visa. And upon graduation, I finally decided to kind of move on to an industry position instead of staying in academia, which I think is for a lot of physics students, it's a very common path. So for the first year, I stayed with my F1 OPT, and then for the first year, I actually did not get the H1B lottery. So I had to apply for the F1 OPT extension, the STEM extension as well. And then later on, I kind of decided to, just move along with the O1 visa that Dan also mentioned earlier. So, it's as he mentioned, it's kind of like one of those like a little known or, a little bit special visa. But yeah, it's really just like a case-by-case decision. So I would definitely recommend you to kind of work with the specialist and basically whoever you can work with for immigration support to get the idea what is the best case that work for your situation. And sometimes I know there are family involved, and as well, like maybe your spouse and maybe your children. And after that, I also just kind of moved on with the green card process, and then got improved for the EP1 category after a little bit wait, and was able to get the process started and all that. So that's pretty much my my story. And I guess one recommendation I would have is definitely start early. Definitely work close with the international office and the immigration specialist. So yeah, I know it's a lot to kind of go through, and you're just students working in a lab or working with your computers for the past couple of years. you barely know about all those immigration stuff, but that's why they're there for support. Definitely try to work with them. And I think one thing, this talk could definitely be helpful for me, like at the time when I was close to my graduation. But later on, I think I kind of have to learn a lot of those things, the way which is covered in this talk, the hard way. And I definitely hope, for a lot of you can kind of avoid some of those, I wouldn't say traps, but just kind of avoid some of those inconvenience by, just talking to your international officers, and also trying to work with the immigration lawyers closely so that they can work out what is the best for you and for your family. So I guess we can move on to questions, and I can definitely help Sherry more about, like, from the perspective of someone who had gone through like all this process recently, especially in the industrial field.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to all of our panelists and all of our speakers for those wonderful presentations and all of the information you've shared. So thank you, Dan and Maria, and thank you so much, Farah and Thomas, for sharing your stories. We do have lots of questions, and we have about the next 25, 27 minutes for them. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. So our first question is, can we go from F1 to H1B without going through OPT?
And the quick answer is yes.
Would you like to elaborate?
Yes. So someone can apply for, you can always apply to change from one status to another. So there really is no need to wait. And because the green card lottery, because the H1B lottery is getting harder, some companies do just start the green card as soon as a student is hired, and they get that before the end of 3 years of STEM OPT, and you don't need the H1B. The issue is travel. If you start a green card and you're on F1, you're really not going to be able to travel. And if you start a green card and it doesn't work and you're on F1, you're still going to have trouble traveling because the F1 requires temporary intent.
Great. Anyone want to add to that before we go on to the next question? Okay. So we're getting a lot of questions on the J1 visa, so I'm going to prioritize those. J1 visa for postdoc work. Generally, university-sponsored J1 for postdocs. What is the most straightforward way to continue after the J1 maximum, which is 5 years, after that expires? The impression I've gotten, the person asking the question, is that while H1B is possible, it appears that universities are hesitant to sponsor this type of visa. Maria, do you want to? Yeah.
I think it's case by case. It depends on the university, and within the university, often depends on the department. A lot of it has to do with funding. A lot of it has to do with the permanency of funding and how that funding is lined up for the next few years. So at the University of Colorado Boulder, we will do H1Bs for postdoc positions, but we also do J1s. We do both. And more consistently, we do a lot of H1Bs, but we are turning more and more to the J1. And the reason for that is, and I had discussed this with Dan in an earlier meeting, is that sometimes your department, the hiring unit might not be able to meet the minimum requirements for the H1B prevailing wage, because there are wage requirements in the H1B setting. And even though higher education is held to a different set of wage requirements, sometimes we just can't meet that wage. So that could be a reason. Also, I think that a lot of postdoc positions are considered temporary positions, which is another reason why a department or a school might say, no, we don't file H1Bs for temporary positions. Dan, do you have something to add to that?
No, I think that's a good discussion. Also, I think it's worth considering how long you think it might be before you before you can apply for a green card. And Farah will know more about this, but I'm seeing people just training longer and longer. I just talked to somebody in neuroscience yesterday who was, in the fifth year of a postdoc, and it may go on for a while. So an H1B is only 6 years, and if you're going to be training for a long time, it's good to use some of the J1 time also if you can.
And at CU Boulder, we will transition from J1 to H1. We can do that as long as you're not subject to the 2-1-2E 2-year home country physical presence requirement, which I don't know if we want to get into that here, but it is possible to transition from J1 to H1. I do that quite a bit.
Great, thank you both. Another question, while applying for H1B visa in an industrial job, do we need to file for H4 separately for a spouse who is currently working in the USA, or H4 visa is also granted when H1B visa is approved? Also, can a spouse under H4 get a work permit?
Thomas, I don't know if you've been through that, but I could, I'll just step in quickly and say each person is separate. You can almost never do different people in the family on the same application. So the H4 will be a separate application. Each person should track their immigration status. In general, H4s cannot work. If you Google, you will find that there is an H4 work card, but that is really only for people who are mostly from India or China and backlogged in the green card process.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Maria. Okay, yeah, I just want to add a little bit to Dan's comment. Yes, so I did not go through the H1B process, but I went through the O3 process, which is the spouse visa for my wife. But yeah, so it's case by case. Usually, what you do is you file your case, and then you work on your case for your spouse. And as far as employment go, or I guess the other thing I want to add is for green card, which is a different story. So for green card, basically at the 485 step, you can apply simultaneously with your wife.
That's one of the things I wanted to address with the H1B. So at the University of Colorado Boulder, we used to take the I-539, which is the H4 application materials, and we would, as just as part of our process, we would include them with the H4 petition. So some attorneys in some schools may be willing to do that, where it can basically you give them the completed I-539 documentation and filing fees, and you submit it all together. Well, when we went remote and we started working remotely, and we were worried about original signatures and FedExes and checks and things like that, basically what we do is we now file the H1B petition. We send the H1B petition receipt notice as soon as we get it. We send it so that the H1B beneficiary can then work on the I-539 for the H4 separately. We stopped, and every employer probably has a different way of doing it, but we stopped offering that service of concurrently adding the I-539, the H4 application on top of the petition. So it'll be employer specific, I think.
Great. Thank you all so much for answering that. So we have two questions on the same topic. I'm just going to read one of them. Do we have to stay in our field on a green card, or can we switch to something softer, such as with a physics PhD, start working at APS in some non-science capacity, like Dan mentioned when talking about the H1B lottery?
Okay, so I think there are a couple different questions in there. To get an OPT is, as Maria said, is wonderful, and that I can see why she loves it. So OPT is more flexible about doing something that's generally related to your degree. The H1B, the job really has to be related to your degree. So I think it would be harder to to get an H1B and keep it for a physics major working at APS. It might be able to be done. Oh, sorry, were you about to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I think the question was after the green card.
After the green card. Okay.
Yeah.
So after a green card is approved, there is no requirement to continue to do anything in particular. If the green card is based on a permanent job offer, so we usually tell people try to stay doing what you're doing for at least 6 months afterwards. You know, if you get sponsored for a green card and then you leave that employer the day after you get your green card, there could be some more questions at the citizenship interview. So try to avoid that. Sorry.
I think both questions are being answered is great. More information, the better. Okay, so we did have some questions coming in on the national interest waiver process. So if you could talk about that. So if someone could just talk about what that process is, the NIW process, as well as someone asked if they can apply for an H1B if they get rejected for a green card through the NIW process.
Well, maybe I'll just take that quickly, but then it sort of leads into, I see there's a question in the chat for Thomas about what it's like to go from academia to industry. So I don't know if that's, it fits in a way with this self-petition. So very quickly, there are two categories of self-petition green card, an extraordinary ability green card and a national interest waiver. Both of them they're like that O1 visa I talked about, where it involves marketing you. So if you're a physicist, but sort of a bachelor's or master's level, it's going to be hard to make that argument that you are so special that you shouldn't have to go through the regular green card process. But when you start to get to the PhD, the postdoc, the industry level, it may be possible. And again, it's all about marketing. Whatever you've done, obviously try to publish, but anything else counts. You know, you can't always publish more than you can, but try to peer review for journals. Probably any postdoc could do that, and that looks very nice on a resume. So do other things that build your resume in the field for that, and they're not easy. So in general, we recommend if there's no point in doing a more expensive self-petition green card now, if you might have a job to sponsor you in a couple of years in an easier, cheaper category.
Yeah, I think what Dan's, so basically for me, I have actually personally went through the NIW process myself. But yeah, so I think as Dan pointed out, it's really like a case by case petition, and I guess first of all, like maybe you should discuss with your immigration lawyer, is this going to be a viable case for you? And second of all, probably you should ask yourself, is this also something that you're sure about doing? So for me personally, I actually later on went with the company-sponsored green card process, which was fully paid for by the company, which is great. So yeah, so I guess, it's one option out there. My suggestion would be definitely keep an eye out for it, and if you think this is the right thing for you to do it, I don't see why not. But yeah, so I would say this is just one of the many options you can go after.
And just quickly, I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but are you eligible to apply for an H1B if you get rejected for the green card NIW? Does anyone know?
And that's an easy yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a question. I think Maria brought this up and someone from the audience wanted to hear Dan expand on it. What is generally better after F1, going for OPT and STEM OPT extension, or just to try for H1B directly?
I think it is case by case, and I'll tell you the factors to think about. OPT and STEM OPT is more flexible. You can more easily do a second job. You can more easily do a side job. You can probably more easily set up your own company. And you can probably more easily do something that's not directly related, like that example of being the physics major who's working at APS. I think that would be easier on OPT or STEM OPT. The disadvantage, so what we usually do is we encourage people to stay on OPT. We encourage them to try the H-1B lottery if they're working for a private employer, and consular process, what Maria was talking about. If you win the H-1B, have the approval sent abroad to a US consulate so you can activate it later. That maybe travel is harder during the pandemic. So, sometimes we reconsider that. But the big advantage of the H-1B is it's a better visa to apply for a green card from. So if you're heading for a green card, I would try to move to the H-1B so that you can travel more easily during the green card process.
If I may add to that, so I did only 1 year of my OPT after my PhD and I did not take advantage of the STEM extension because my advisor knew that I was hoping to apply for a green card, so he thought it would be better for me to move on to an H-1B, which is why we went through the process of applying for my H-1B after 1 year of OPT.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on your specific case, and maybe talk to your DSO and immigration lawyer. Okay, what would be a suitable visa if I were to start my own company or startup following my PhD? And a related question was, can we work for our own US incorporated company with a B1 visa?
I would say entrepreneurs are different, and they're more complicated. Immigration is all about categories, and the categories were not created in the 1960s and 70s for entrepreneurs. They were created for 9-to-5 employees, and that's a bit of a stretch. I'm going to share, well, just in the chat here, this a website called usaie.org. This is the U.S. Alliance for International Entrepreneurs. It's a nonprofit that we're part of that has information. So if you go to the F1 section, for example, it'll talk about setting up your own company. And I would recommend, oh, thank you, Farah. I would recommend I would recommend talking to somebody if you're going to be setting up your own company. It's just different. Anytime you're doing something in the immigration system that doesn't fit neatly into a category, you're talking about being creative and looking at other categories. So I would, it's a little too much probably to do here. The other thing I'm going to share quickly is just an article we did about ways that the Biden administration can help support international entrepreneurs, and it kind of goes through some of the categories there. And there's an article that's linked in there that talks about how to use all the existing categories to support entrepreneurs. And what I'm really want to do later this year is take that 11-page article, which maybe some of you may be less likely to read, and make it into a graphic so it's more accessible.
Thank you so much for sharing that resource. So we have a couple questions from the employer side. So I'm just going to switch for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the J1s and the H1Bs and the OPTs. How difficult is it for an employer to get set up on E-Verify? It's okay if you don't know this, just let me know. And then someone had a related question about how much it costs an employer to sponsor an H1B. Do any of you happen to know this?
Well, I can take the cost question. Maria, I don't know if you've talked to companies about signing up for E-Verify. It doesn't seem that hard, but I haven't talked to them specifically. A lot of them just don't want to do it because they don't want to be part of one more government program.
Yeah. It's not hard at all, actually. And one thing that I think I would keep in mind about E-Verify is that when the government said you need to be an E-Verify employer, what they meant for the purposes of OPT STEM was that you're not a partial E-Verify employer, that you actually E-Verify all of your employers, not just a certain segment of your employees. But it's not difficult at all. However, as Dan said, it's not something that should be done lightly. And so I have had international students who go up to their employers like, well, why don't you just register with E-Verify? It's easy. And yeah, it's easy, but there are pretty significant responsibilities that come along with it. And so I recommend that an employer do a little bit of research before they just go and sign up for it, because there are audits and things that can happen as a consequence of signing up, and there's a responsibility to being an E-Verify employer. But it's not difficult at all to do. So it's a pretty simple process.
Yeah, and just quickly, the H1B costs are usually about $2,000 in filing fees or in legal fees for a 3-year visa, and about $2,500 in filing fees, and then another $2,500 in expedite fees if they want that.
And it's a little bit different in higher ed, right, Dan? So for
Yes,
higher ed,
yeah.
we have a different. They don't charge us as much because we don't have as much money. So the filing fees are a little bit different if you're working for higher education, but it's still, the costs need to be borne by the employer. So we pay for our H1B costs.
And just quickly related to that, what is the wage threshold for H1B? Do you know off the top of your head?
Such a complicated question.
Yeah, a lot of you are probably really good data people. So I'm actually going to give you the data. I'll put I'm going to put it in the chat. There's the data. Level 1 is entry level. Level 4 is senior level. You can look up your geographic area. You can look up your whether it's a university or a private industry, and play around and see how it looks.
Thank you for sharing that, Dan. Sorry, I thought it was a very quick question. I guess it's complicated is often the answer for these. Yeah, so there was a question in the chat. I'm trying to focus on the Q&A. Please, just a reminder, submit your questions through the Q&A box rather than the chat, because the chat questions get lost. But there was a question for Dr. Zhang. Would you like to share some advice on how to transition from academia to industry with a background in modeling and simulation?
Yeah. So I was just going to type in some answer, but yeah. So I think this is actually a very, very good question. I'd imagine probably more than half of the attendants today will eventually move on to a non-academic position in the industry. And as physicists, working on data scientist or mathematical modeling, that's I guess sharing kind of my personal experience. Like most people I know ended up either in Silicon Valley or in Wall Street. So those are like the two hubs for physicists, essentially. Yeah, so I think a couple of things I can share. One is definitely trying to find an internship to try and kind of test the water and see if actually this is something you'd enjoy. This is very different from academia per se. And the other thing, of course, is also kind of broaden your skill set. For research, it's really very specialized, but in industry, there are a lot of many different things that might be helpful for you. For example, like you'd be surprised how many people in industry today still use Excel sheets as one of the main data source for sharing. Which I imagine, for a lot of physicists, it's not being used anymore. But yeah, so I guess just little things like that. It's that's definitely some hard transitions. But I'm sure after going through the PhD process, you have the capabilities to learn all the different skill sets that will help you successful in your job.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have lots of APS career resources as well on how to switch from academia to industry. I've added some links in the chat, but I'll be happy to talk about it more at the end if there's time. But thank you for that advice, Thomas. Okay, we still have lots of questions, so we'll do our best to get through them. Maria, could you please comment on the J1 visa regarding the physical presence requirement, or on what does it depend?
Well, you can be found subject to this 2-year requirement for a few different reasons. One of the main reasons is that you're from a country that has set aside a certain certain skills. It's called the skills list. And it's actually, you can look it up. The Department of State skills list. So for example, depending on where you're from, if you're coming to the United States to practice a skill that your country feels is necessary to come back to use in your home country, then they have an agreement and they'll make you subject. So for example, China skills list encompasses every single skill. So if you're an international scholar coming on a J1 program, you will be subject because of the skills list. The other way you can be subject is if you come on, like for example, if you come on a Fulbright, you will definitely be subject. And Dan could probably speak to that. And I think traditionally Fulbrights are really hard to get waivers for. You can also be subject for other government funding. So receiving government funding that fosters international exchange. There's some confusing language about whether or not it's indirect or direct government funding. So basically the US Department of State is responsible for finding whether, making that determination whether or not you're subject. And then if you are subject, it creates an obstacle for you. And Dan, maybe you can help me here, but I believe what it is that you're not eligible for an H1B visa or the K visa, or moving forward to permanent residency. For moving out of the non-immigrant status, it creates an obstacle so that you can't easily move into that next stage unless you get a waiver or you satisfy the requirement. And getting a waiver is something that our office, actually, we have a lot of scholars who are subject to 212E, who are really interested in moving forward to an H1B. So for us, because we work in partnership with the US Department of State when we do our J1s, we do not help with the waiver process. We ask the students or the scholars to work with an attorney or to work with the US Department of State on their own to request a waiver. The other option is to satisfy the requirement. And you have to either prove that you have satisfied it or you have waived it in order to move forward. In my case, I encounter this mostly in the H1B setting.
And that's great. Two quick footnotes on that. One is that you can't get an H1B visa or finish a green card, but you can do anything else. And so this is the way lawyers think. Well, if we can't do those things, we can do anything else. So you can start a green card and get organized on it and get part of the way there, or you can move to any other kind of visa, E, L, O, F. You just can't do the H1B. And the other quick footnote is, if you're going to deal with the 2-year home residence requirement by going home for 2 years, make sure you go to the right country. It's your country of last permanent residence that's listed on the DS 2019. Make sure it's that one.
Yeah, they'll tell you which country made you subject. I actually just had this horrible experience. I was working on an H1B, and the scholar had told me that they had been in the United States on a J1 program back in 2004, and they were subject. And I just assumed it was 2004. It was a long time ago. I assumed that they had satisfied the requirement, and they had also included a receipt notice for an I-140. So I made these assumptions, and when I went to file, I recognized that they had not gone back to the country that had made them subject. They had gone to a different country, and so they were still actually subject to the requirement. And lesson learned for me was, so then we had to start the waiver process before I could move forward on the H1B.
And sorry if I missed it. Are we talking about the 2-year home presence requirement waiver? Okay.
Yeah.
Got a lot of questions on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a sticky issue.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just looking. Yeah, so maybe we just talked about this, but someone who is a J1 researcher wants to get the 2-year homestay waived. If they're able to do that, what are their visa options? Do they need to enter the H1B lottery?
Well, one thing I would like to point out as a DSO, an ARO, there's a different acronym for J1. So I'm an alternate responsible officer for the J1 program. If you're a J1 research scholar and you are approved for a waiver, you need to be really careful because your J1 sponsor should not extend your J1 program after a waiver has been approved, because technically we're not supposed to extend, and also extending can make you subject again. Dan, you might have more information on that, but we get notice of when a waiver has been approved, and we make like a big note of it, because if you're not at the end of your 5-year period and you have that waiver approved, extending your J1 is no longer an option, and that leaves you with most likely moving forward on H1B or a different visa status that Dan can talk about.
I just want to make sure we're respecting everyone's time. So we're technically almost out of time. So I just quickly wanted to say, for anyone who is looking for jobs right now, APS is hosting a virtual career fair in September. Registration is open. I am sending a link right now. It's actually a job fair and a graduate school fair. So if you're trying to figure out what you want to do, you're welcome to attend through the link that I just sent. But yeah, this is all the time we have today for the official webinar. We apologize if we did not get to your questions, but we encourage you to follow up by sending an email to webinars@aps.org, and we'll do our best to forward your questions to our speakers for comments. I also wanted to remind you that a recording of the video presentation will be made available on the APS webinar homepage. Please allow 5 business days for upload. Also, please take a moment to give us some feedback as you leave today by filling out our short survey. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and thank you so much to all of our speakers and panelists for the amazing information you provided. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see all the attendees again at the next broadcast in September. American Physical Society, copyright 2021, all rights reserved.